They came without warning from the darkness beyond the stars. Their ships moved like shadows across the solar system, cold and silent, their presence filled the void with an ancient power, the kind that had crushed worlds and erased civilizations. Without mercy, they called themselves the Immortal Empire, and their message echoed through every channel in every language across every corner of Earth: surrender and be preserved, or resist and be erased. The people of Earth stopped for a moment. Some stared at the skies, others looked at each other, unsure, afraid, curious, and yet something burned quietly behind their eyes. It was not fear, it was not surrender, it was something older, deeper. It was the will to survive, the will to fight back. Even when the enemy seemed too big, too powerful, too impossible. The Immortal Empire had ruled half the galaxy for more than 10,000 years. They had no memory of defeat, no concept of challenge. They believed all life existed to serve, or to be erased, and when they found Earth, they saw only another minor world to add to their eternal collection. But humanity was different, and they would learn that soon. In the center of the Earth's orbiting defense network, a single station came alive. With activity, the Global Defense Union had been formed within hours of the Empire's message. Generals, scientists, engineers, and leaders from every nation gathered in silent agreement. They would not kneel, they would not run. This was not just about survival, this was about dignity, about defiance. Commander Ray stood at the edge of the main command platform, his hands behind his back, his eyes fixed on the massive screen that showed the incoming fleet. They were still at the edge of the system. Maybe a week away, maybe less, depending on their speed. He listened as voices filled the room. Reports, analysis, simulations. Fear was there, yes, but so was fire. Dear Elena stood beside him, her voice calm and clear, as she explained what they had gathered from the enemy signal. The technology was advanced far beyond anything Earth had seen, but not impossible to understand. It would take time, but there were patterns, there were flaws. Ray turned to her and asked only one question: can we fight? Her answer came not with words, but with a firm nod and a spark in her eyes. Far below Earth, in the underground labs, engineers and hackers began pulling apart the intercepted data. Alien code flowed across screens, and within it, they found structure, they found logic, and logic could be broken. Captain Malik led the orbital units, the last line of defense if the fleet reached Earth. He moved through his teams with steady words, his presence calm and solid like stone, even though he knew the sky could burn at any moment. In cities across the planet, people watched as the broadcast showed the approaching ships. They were unlike anything imagined. No engines, no visible weapons, just floating monoliths, silent and terrifying. And yet, even as panic touched the streets, there was also something else. There were flags in windows. There were people signing up to fight. There were kids drawing pictures of Earth, punching spaceships. There was unity, and unity was rare. The Empire sent a second message as they neared the orbit of Neptune. It was simple: surrender, window closing, final notice. The GDU sent no reply, not yet. Instead, they finished preparing their satellites. They completed dark mesh shields around the moon. They activated prototype systems, still untested and raw, because there was no more time, no more waiting. Ray stood before the global network, his voice broadcasted live to the world. His words were simple: we have been given a choice, and we have made it. We do not surrender. We do not break. If they want this world, they will have to take it from us. And then Earth sent a reply to the Empire, a signal compressed tight and fast, translated into the alien code in broadcast. Back toward the approaching fleet, it contained only two words: try us. On the lead ship of the Empire's fleet, an ancient intelligence processed the message. It had seen hundreds of planets bow at the first command. It had watched entire species erase themselves to avoid the pain of resistance. But this message was different, and it paused for just a second. The fleet adjusted its course and sent a detachment ahead, a scouting force, powerful enough to destroy a moon, but small enough to avoid full commitment. They would test the species and send a message of their own. As the scout ships passed by Mars, They launched a wide beam strike and turned the red colonies into glass structures. Vanished dust rose into space, and silence returned. It was a demonstration. It was meant to end the fight before it began, but Earth did not kneel. Instead, deep within the polar base, a swarm of drones launched into space. Fast, small, nearly invisible. They moved like insects with minds of their own. They carried no pilots, only code and will, and a single purpose: disrupt. Confuse, destroy. The drones struck from every angle, piercing the blind spots of the Empire's designs. They shut down engines, scrambled sensors, fed false images into alien systems, and then detonated in patterns that mimicked natural phenomena. The Empire's scout fleet fired blindly into space, not knowing what was real and what was ghost. By the time Earth's second wave of weapons arrived, hidden inside hollowed asteroids and disguised as space debris, the Empire's scouts were already in disarray. And when the kinetic rods fell from orbit faster than sound and heavier than tanks, they pierced the enemy ships like paper. One by one, the Empire's scout ships were erased, not by superior strength, but by surprise, by cleverness, by fury. Back in the Empire's command ship, the ancient mind processed the failure. It did not understand. It did not accept the data. It recalculated it, reanalyzed it, reassessed, and came to only one conclusion: Earth was a threat. The full fleet adjusted course, now heading for Earth. No more games, no more tests. They would burn the planet from orbit and move on. But as they came closer, they found the space between the planets already filled with minds that did not look like minds, satellites that hummed with energy beams waiting to fire, and a planet that did not cry out in fear but stood ready, defiant, united. Immortal Empire had challenged humanity, but they had made one mistake. They had assumed humanity would act like every other species they had crushed before, but humans were something different, and they had only just begun to fight. Martian sky no longer held color or breath. It had once been home to scientists, workers, explorers, who dreamed of turning red dust into green fields. But now nothing remained except silence and smoke. The Immortal Empire had made its first move, and it had been cruel, fast, and devastating. It was meant to break the spirit of Earth before the real war even started. But Earth did not fall. It stood still, watching with cold eyes and clenched fists from bunkers and command rooms, from valleys and orbiting towers. Humanity responded not with panic, but with purpose. The Martian loss was not just a tragedy. It became fuel in the deep sea base's engineers finished activating cloaked satellites that had been long forgotten. Projects once shelved for being too dangerous, now brought online without hesitation. Above the atmosphere, stations began pulsing waves of interference into space signals that did not scream, but whispered poison into the Empire's data streams. Commander Ray stood in the war chamber, a massive sphere surrounded by moving displays, glowing lines showing patterns of the approaching fleet. He gave orders without pause, each word precise, each movement careful. Behind his eyes burned the memory of what Mars had become, and with every word he pushed the defense forward. Stronger, harder. Elena moved through the science division, her mind racing faster than the lights flickering overhead. She had discovered something inside the enemy's signal pulses, a hidden rhythm, a strange delay pattern, almost invisible, but enough to mean one thing: the enemy's systems were not as perfect as they claimed. They were fast, yes, but not instant. And inside that gap she saw opportunity. Across the moonbase's preparations continued. Weapons once considered too unstable were being mounted into rail launchers, energy coils overcharged to levels far beyond safety warnings, because now safety no longer mattered, only survival did. Captain Malik flew a black shuttle through the edge of the asteroid belt, his team planting small devices shaped like ordinary space rocks, but inside each one lay a surprise cluster: mines, timed drones, trap signals, anything that could cause chaos when the enemy arrived. These traps would not win the war, but they would tear small pieces from the Empire's skin, and even immortals could bleed. As Earth watched the stars, a strange thing happened. On distant systems, alien species hidden in corners of the galaxy began to listen. Some of them had once been powerful, now scattered and silent survivors of the same empire now challenging Earth. They saw the broadcast from Earth. They saw the message. Try us, and for the first time in generations, they felt something other than fear. They felt hope. One such species relayed silent data toward Earth, encoded in deep pulses forgotten by the Empire's own filters, coordinates locations, and most important, weaknesses. The enemy did not think anyone would dare share such secrets, but they were wrong. Back on Earth, factories ran without rest. People volunteered without question, not just soldiers but engineers, coders, miners, pilots, all hands turning the keel. Planet into a machine of resistance. Children painted stars on broken walls. Old men melted scrap into armor. Young women reprogrammed delivery drones into bomb carriers. Every person became a threat in the fabric of war. The Empire sent a second wave. A larger force, not scouts this time, but hunters. Heavy ships, thick with armor, bright with energy trails. Their arrival cast shadows across Saturn's rings, and their confidence ran deep. They expected fear again. They expected silence. They found something else. As they crossed into Earth's outer traps, the first wave of mines ignited, not with explosions, but with blackouts. The ships lost part of their vision. Their scans became cloudy. Their formations stumbled. And in that moment, Earth struck from the far side of the moon. Rail cannons launched thunder into space. Steel rods accelerated past sound, past light, and smashed into the lead ship, tearing through shields and carving metal into fragments. Not one shot, but dozens, each one timed to exploit the gaps Dr. Elena had mapped from her study of their code. Empire fired back. Beams of fire lanced across space, burning through clouds of drones, but not hitting the real targets because Earth's forces had split their signal masks, scattered their heat trails, used the solar winds as camouflage. It was not strength, it was cleverness, and cleverness made the Empire angry. Captain Malik led a small squadron of stealth fighters into the middle of the chaos. No bigger than cargo trucks, they darted between explosions, deploying signal jammers and magnet hooks, attaching to enemy hulls and ripping pieces away with every pass. The battle above Jupiter's orbit turned the sky into fire, but still Earth did not fall. Still Earth did not run. Instead, the attack grew faster, more unpredictable. Every defense became an offense. Every loss became a new tactic. One of Earth's satellites, disguised as space debris, drifted silently near the largest enemy cruiser, then split open to reveal a cluster of sphere drones, each one small, but packed with anti-energy fields. They latched onto the hull and pulsed in sync, disrupting the Empire's regeneration systems and causing chain reactions inside their own power cores. When the explosion came, it lit the void like a new sun, and for the first time the Empire felt confusion from the command center on Earth. Ray watched the screen as the largest red mark faded from the map, one hand gripping the railing. He did not speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because now the enemy would know this was only the beginning. Earth had lost much, yes, but every loss was answered, every strike returned. And now the Empire would have to understand that this was no longer a conquest. This was a war, and in war humans had one strength above all: they refused to quit. They would fight in the skies and under the sea, on the cold moon and the burning sun. They would turn every shadow into a weapon, every signal into a trap, every weakness into a doorway. The Empire had sent a message, and Earth had replied, and now as the third wave of enemy ships entered the system, they would find not a broken world but a rising storm, because humanity had been tested, and instead of breaking, it had sharpened. Now the Immortal Empire would see what it meant to challenge a species that did not know how to kneel. This was only the start. The stars looked the same, but the silence between them had changed. What once belonged to the Immortal Empire now echoed with uncertainty. Their ships still moved with power, their presence still stretched like a shadow across space, but now that shadow flickered. The pattern of easy victory was broken, the rhythm of endless domination disturbed by a species they had thought too young, too small, too primitive to matter on Earth. The people no longer waited for safety. They had become the force that shaped the battle factories, turned faster than ever, weapons created in hours instead of months, codes rewritten in the time it took to blink, data flowed through underground networks faster than light plans, made by humans, machines, and algorithms, all working together because survival was no longer the only goal. Now it was about winning. In the dark valleys of the moon, a new type of satellite unfolded its panels, shimmering with strange patterns taken from alien tech captured during the second battle inside these machines. Burned cores powered by compressed gravity taken from the edges of neutron stars, something never tested, something only theorized. But now it had purpose, and the purpose was simple: disrupt, destroy, confuse. Commander Ray stood inside the orbital command ring, his eyes following the map of the solar system, each icon moving in perfect simulation, showing ships, weapons, traps, waves of signal noise. His voice calm as he gave orders not just to soldiers, but to scientists, hackers, logistics teams, even civilians who had volunteered to serve from behind screens and code. Dr. Elena paced along a wall filled with alien blueprints, pieces of code floating mid-air in projection, her mind racing with patterns. New language formed from years of study mixed with intuition and risk. She had found something deep inside the Empire's regeneration system, a weak point hidden in the timing of molecular rebuilds, something so small Empire believed it impossible to exploit. But humans were not bound by their rules. In underground bunkers, coders who once built games or cracked security systems now worked to break the largest digital empire the galaxy had seen. They had learned the alien code not as students, but as predators. Every line of alien programming became a map to follow, a maze to reverse. And inside it they found paths the enemy never believed could exist. On the edge of Saturn's rings, a new defense station powered by pure fusion prepared its launch sequence. It was disguised as part of a mining facility, hollowed out and filled with rail launchers, shield disruptors, and a weapon that sent artificial gravity waves strong enough to twist metal. It was not elegant, it was not clean, but it was human. Captain Malik had now been promoted to lead a strike fleet composed of hybrid ships, human-built with Empire technology, grafted in strange designs, patched together from broken pieces and reprogrammed cores. Each ship named after lost cities and fallen heroes. They flew not with beauty, but with rage, and Malik was the fire that drove them. The Empire noticed the change. Their command fleet slowed near Uranus, scanning with deeper signals, trying to make sense of this resistance. They had expected one battle, maybe two. Now they found themselves caught in a slow burn war, where every system, every ship, every path had to be double-checked. They sent probes laced with virus code into Earth's orbit, hoping to infect the systems, hoping to corrupt the machines. But Earth had expected this, and when those probes arrived, they were captured, pulled into honey trap signals where waiting firewalls wrapped them in digital chains and shut them down before they could scream for help. Earth launched a counter signal hidden inside a repair transmission meant for one of their captured ships. It passed through the Empire's network, unnoticed until it reached their primary relay, where it exploded not with fire, but with confusion. Systems began speaking in reverse. Sensors flipped their logic engines, reset without command. It lasted only minutes, but in those minutes the Empire lost formation, and Earth attacked again. Dr. Elena's new weapon, fired from a stealth ship that had been hiding in the radiation belt, released a pulse not of heat or light, but of interference. Targeted at the regeneration core of the largest cruiser, the pulse passed through the shields and struck the core, timing the disruption perfectly to hit mid-cycle. The result was complete shutdown. The ship drifted lifeless until it collided with one of its own. The galaxy watched in silence. Some alien races sent coded signals of encouragement. Others dared to forward scrap data stolen from long ago battles, everything they could offer to this strange species that now fought the unkillable commander. Ray sat in the strategy chamber, watching reports come in from Mars orbit, where a group of miners had held off an Empire scout team using modified drills and explosive gas vents. Every report filled him with something sharp, not hope, not pride, something more like hunger. The hunger to end this. Humanity was not winning because of strength. They were winning because they refused to obey the script. They used the sun itself now, with panels that bounced energy across orbital mirrors, blinding enemy sensors. During fleet movement, they used the tides to charge underwater launchers. They used the Earth's magnetic field to shield communication from jamming. They fought in ways the Empire had never prepared for, because they fought with everything. Captain Malik's fleet now moved through the dark side of Saturn, hiding in the shadows of ice chunks. Using the cover of drifting debris, they launched surprise raids on supply ships of the Empire, striking fast and vanishing before the return fire came. Not once, not twice, but over and over, leaving the Empire chasing ghosts and bleeding resources. The Empire began adapting, sending new types of ships, new waves of drones, stronger shields, faster weapons. But they still followed patterns, and that was their mistake, because humans did not follow. They broke rules. They wrote new ones. They turned every disaster into a lesson, every defeat into a plan. As the next wave of enemy ships moved into the inner system, Earth was ready, not just with weapons, but with unity. Countries that once argued now shared technology. Industries, once in competition, now built for the same purpose. People once divided, now stood shoulder to shoulder. The world was not perfect, but it was together, and above it all hung the moon, dark and silent, but alive with fire, a symbol of defiance carved with launch pads, railguns, and solar sails pointing outward into the void. Immortal Empire had begun to feel something they had not felt in thousands of years. They were beginning to feel pressure, and the pressure was rising. The dark side of Earth turned slowly beneath the stars, lit by fire and steel machines moving across orbit like shadows that never slept. The war had changed from defense to defiance. And now humanity no longer fought to survive. It fought to push forward, to take ground, to strike back, because now they knew something the Empire had never expected. Enemy could be hurt. The Empire's fleets had grown slower, more cautious. They moved through space like kings who no longer trusted their crowns. Their formations, once perfect, had begun to shift into tighter groups, less confident, less willing to split, as if the cold minds behind them were beginning to learn fear, even if they would never admit it. Commander Ray sat in the main control chamber overlooking the Earth's orbit, his eyes tracking every ship, every signal, every movement of friend and foe. His team worked in silence, broken only by brief commands, quick data handoffs, fast strategy checks. Time moved like lightning inside the chamber, and every decision made here shaped the war far across space. In a hidden base, carved into the hollow remains of a drifting asteroid, a small group of hackers stared at alien code flashing across black screens. It was the Empire's master network, something never meant to be reached. But the Empire had made one mistake. It had left echoes in its broken ships, pieces of logic, fragments of data, and humans had picked through every bite like scavengers hunting gold. The group was led by a young woman, whose name was forgotten in the history of the war. She wore no uniform, gave no speeches. She had once built music software, now she was building digital fire. She found the command lines buried under layers of protection, a heartbeat of the Empire's essay command, and she did not try to destroy it. She bent it, twisted it, looped its signal through a mirror of Earth's own satellites, and when she let it go, it spread like smoke. For 3 full minutes, the Empire's primary command fleet received false orders from itself. Ships turned in confusion sensors, read friendly signals as enemy. One group of destroyers fired on their own formation, thinking it was a human ambush, and by the time the smoke cleared, half the formation had been scattered, and the rest had exposed their weakness. Elena watched the battle from a science bay deep under the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by walls of water and circuits glowing with energy. She had finished building the pulsar ray, the one designed to reach into the core of the Empire's regeneration systems, the one that did not break metal but broke memory, and when fired, erased the map the enemy carried of its own. design turning once perfect machines into blind wanderers. Order was given, and the array fired from beneath the sea, its waves spread through the magnetic tunnels of Earth's field, leaping into space carried by solar wind, and it struck 3 of the Empire's most advanced dreadnoughts, disabling not just shields, but memory banks. The ships floated lost as if sleep had been forced upon them. Captain Malik flew through the chaos in a warship shaped like a blade, its sides packed with scavenged tech stolen from fallen enemy wrecks, his voice calm, his hands steady as his fleet moved through tight formations, cutting deep into the enemy lines, not with force, but with precision. They struck reactors, weapon nodes, communication hubs, and left behind nothing but drifting husks. The battle near Jupiter had begun with fire, but it became something else, a test of will. A war, not just of weapons, but of minds and ideas and choices. Immortal Empire had always won because it did not feel, because it did not change, because it believed no one could challenge perfection. But now the perfect system was cracking in one key moment. Malik's fleet surrounded the Empire's relay cruiser, the one responsible for central control in that region. Instead of destroying it, they transmitted a virus that broadcast a loop of human history, music, protests, revolutions, voices from every culture, every language, every time shouting the same message: we choose, we fight, we fall, and we rise. The Empire's systems struggled to process the meaning. The cruiser began to pulse with light and sound caught between command and confusion until it finally detonated from the inside. Across the solar system, signals changed frequencies, weapons began to shift direction. Ships moved differently, and in the middle of all of it, the Immortal Emperor woke, hidden in a palace ship deep behind the front lines. He had slept for centuries, kept alive by the same systems that powered his empire, never needing to act, never needing to speak. But now the disturbance had reached him, and he opened his eyes. Not in curiosity, but in disbelief. He had created the network that ruled the galaxy, not to guide but to control. And now control had slipped, and in its place stood a species he had never noticed. He did not understand them, he could not predict them. He ordered the last line of defense to be activated, ships that had not moved in 1,000 years. Weapons built to end stars rather than ships, machines with minds too dangerous to use. Until now the fleet emerged near Neptune, black as space, silent and hungry. Unlike the others, they did not move in formation. They hunted. Commander Ray saw the new signal and gave no reaction except to raise one hand, then lowered it sharply. His team launched the final wave of Earth's response. All across the system, human ships rose, not clean, not uniform, each one different, a mix of old and new steel, wrapped in memory, wrapped in rage. At the front flew a single ship carrying a device built in silence, a sphere that did not shine, that had no engine of its own. It was the Singularity device, built to collapse not stars, but reality itself in a controlled burst, and it would not be fired from far away. It would be carried by hand. Malik had volunteered. He stood alone in the ship, surrounded by quiet, surrounded by fire. He looked once toward Earth and whispered something no one could hear, not goodbye, but something older, something stronger. Then turned toward the enemy. The turning point had come, and now the Empire would face the full weight of a world that refused to die. The black sky above Saturn turned into fire. Ships moved like burning stars. The space between planets filled with heat and chaos. The final battle had begun. And no corner of the solar system was silent. The fleets of Earth, once scattered, now moved together like a tide, like a storm, carrying centuries of human struggle, pain and strength, into the heart of a war older than memory. The last wave of empire. Ships stood like giants, their hulls covered in living armor, their weapons pulsing with energy enough to tear a moon in half. They did not speak, they did not blink, they only advanced with cold purpose. But this time something was different. They were not facing a world hiding behind walls. They were facing a world that had learned to stand and strike and rise. Commander Ray stood at the edge of the command deck, surrounded by images of fire and dust, his face calm, his eyes sharp. The last plan had already begun. There was no need to give more orders. Every team, every ship, every station knew what had to be done. This was not a mission. This was a final answer to a question written in the stars. Across the battlefield, the Earth fleet moved in 3 directions, not to surround, but to confuse. Some ships danced between wreckage. Some turned off power to become invisible. Some moved straight toward the heart of the Empire fleet, carrying the most dangerous gift of all, the singularity. Device was cold and silent, inside Captain Malik's ship, wrapped in a magnetic shell floating in the center of the control room. He sat with hands on the wheel, his mind still, his body steady. He remembered the faces of those who had fallen, the voices of those who had chosen to fight, and the promise he had made to end this, no matter the cost, as his ship moved through the Empire lines. Chaos followed. Drones swarmed behind him, firing in every direction like hornets with fire in their wings. Satellites opened and released signal pulses that jammed the Empire's vision and hearing. Every sensor overloaded, every system twisted by new code. Dr. Elena watched from the ocean base as the breaker signal fired a second time, this one tuned not to machines but to the very core of the Empire's secret power, the immortality. Nanotech that kept their soldiers alive forever. The wave passed through shields, through armor, through bone and blood, and for the first time in 10,000 years, Empire soldiers began to fall. Their armor no longer repaired their wounds, no longer closed, and the fear they had never known took root. In space, Earth fighters began pushing forward with new force, not because they had more weapons, but because they had a reason. They had seen the giant bleed, they had watched the Immortal fall, and now they knew the truth. This enemy could be broken. The Emperor's ship finally moved from the shadows, black and wide, like a city floating in the void. Its walls, covered in the history of 1,000 worlds, burned and forgotten inside. He stood in silence, surrounded by the last AI minds still loyal. He gave no speech, he made no sound, he simply activated the final protocol, a weapon so powerful it could erase half the system. A sun killer drawn from the gravity of collapsed stars, it began to charge light, bending around its edges, heat pulling from the core of nearby planets. But before it could fire, Malik's ship broke through the last line, pushed forward faster than light, faster than thought, surrounded by debris and fire and screams of metal, until he was close enough to see the massive shape of the Emperor's vessel with his own eyes. He reached for the device, unlocked the last seal, and set it free. The singularity burst open, not with fire but with silence. It pulled light and time into itself, bending the space around it. The Empire ship began to twist, torn from within. Its weapons died. Its walls cracked, its engines failed. The sun killer faded into sparks. The Emperor tried to move, tried to escape, but the force held him, and in that moment, for the first time in his long life, he saw something he did not understand. He saw a man, a mortal, a soldier, flying toward him, not with fear, not with hate, but with purpose. Captain Malik closed his eyes as the singularity consumed both ships, their light folding into nothing. The blast sent waves across the battlefield. Empire ships began to falter one after another, their command structure gone, their vision broken, their immortality shattered. They tried to regroup, but Earth pressed forward. Commander Ray gave the final order: no mercy, no retreat, and Earth's fleet delivered it with fire and ice. Every ship that had once feared the Empire now roared through its lines. Every pilot, every gunner, every engineer became the storming hours. It was over. The last Empire vessel drifted into the sun, melting without a word, no signal, no crying, no warning. The Immortal Empire was gone, and Earth stood in silence. Ashes floated across space, fragments of ships, dust of giants, echoes of a war that had nearly ended a world. But Earth had survived. Not by chance, not by numbers, but by will. The leaders of Earth met under a new sky, the stars brighter now, the fear gone from their edges. They did not speak of rebuilding first. They stood in silence for the ones who had fallen. Then they began to plan, not for war, but for peace. The alien species that had once watched from the shadows stepped forward one by one, offering thanks, offering alliance, offering respect, because they had seen something in humanity that even the Empire had missed: the ability to adapt, The courage to change, the strength to fight even when all seemed lost years past, and the name of the Immortal Empire faded into dust, stories told only in history screens and whispered between travelers. But one thing remained in every corner of the galaxy, the memory of the moment when humanity stood against the oldest power in existence and refused to kneel. In the heart of Earth, a statue stood tall, not of a king, not of a god, but of a soldier reaching toward the stars. With one arm and holding nothing in the other, because that empty hand was the symbol of choice, the choice to rise, and above that statue, carved in simple letters, was the message that had changed everything. Try us the end.